A few signatures on a few pieces of paper that are the foundation of not just Beatlemania, but of almost all music created after. And it walks into the Pawn Stars shop? Yep, that's exactly what happened when the original signed contract between the Beatles and their first manager, Brian Epstein, walks into the shop. Before moving on, here comes the subscribe request. Won't you please help me? Hit that like button, get notifications, and subscribe to the channel. With a little help from my friends, I can keep growing this channel. Epstein wasn't just the first Beatles manager, he was the man who transformed the Beatles. He put them in suits, gave them polish, and launched them towards stardom, believing in them more than anyone else who saw them play. Paul McCartney even called him the fifth Beatle. And when he passed away in 1967, the band was devastated, with some speculating that is when the band's breakup really began because he was that influential to them. That's why this contract is such a massive deal. It was signed so early that both McCartney and George Harrison's parents had to co-sign because they were still under 21. And crucially, this contract includes Ringo Starr, not their original drummer Pete Best. That detail alone changes everything. There actually is another contract out there almost identical to this one on the show, the earlier signed contract between Epstein and the Beatles, but with Pete Best, the original drummer. That one last sold in 2019 for $348,000. So here's the big question. Is the Ringo contract worth more? Or does the one with the earlier history with Pete Best and his more rare signature carry the edge? The seller told Rick he bought the contract from the person who had won it at a Christie's auction back in 2004. What doesn't get mentioned on the show is how much it sold for in that auction. But I found it for you, so just stick with me a minute. Rick brought in his autograph expert Steve, who verified it was authentic and gave it a value of around $500,000. Not bad, but the seller was asking for $1 million. That's a huge gap. So what accounts for that difference? Steve referenced past auctions, but he didn't give any numbers of those. So let's look at the actual history. Back in 2004, Christie's sold this exact contract for £122,850, which was about $200,000 at the time. It popped back up in another auction in 2008, but it didn't meet the reserve price. Based on what I could find, that reserve was probably around $450,000 to $480,000, given that at least one article I found says that $480,000 could buy the contract. To me, that means the Pawn Stars seller likely paid somewhere north of $400,000 for it when he bought it from the 2004 auction winner. This at least partially explains why he was hoping for $1 million. Well, that and the fact that he had a rare Beatles item, so why not? Rick made what was honestly a very fair offer, though I'm sure some in the comments will disagree. He offered $350,000, but if the seller really had over $400,000 invested, there was very little chance he was going to take that offer. So was the seller just greedy and overvaluing the contract, or was Rick undervaluing it? Well, about a year after the episode aired, we get the answer when the contract went back to auction with Sotheby's. Its final price? It sold for £365,000, roughly $569,000. At that number, Rick definitely missed out on a profit. Buying it at $350,000 and realizing $569,000 at auction, even after fees, would have been a great win. For the seller, though, it's less clear. After estimating auction fees, he likely walked away with around $450,000. Depending on what he originally paid, though, he might have barely broken even. So, in the end, both sides were right. The seller wasn't crazy for holding out, and Rick wasn't crazy for getting closer to the asking price. But it's hard not to wonder, what would you have done in the seller's shoes? Because make no mistake, taking something like this to auction does have risk, and a cash offer on the spot of $350,000 is nothing to sneeze at. But let me know in the comments what you think. Was $350,000 a fair offer, or would you have rolled the dice further on a piece of Beatles history? And are you surprised at what the contract brought at auction? Too high? Too low? Let me know what you think. Before you go, don't let me down. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That would make me feel fine. Thanks for watching.